For more than a century and a half, it's been framed as a huge battle, evolution versus faith. But what if that entire conflict is based on a pretty big misunderstanding? Today, we're diving into a framework called intelligent evolution, and it doesn't just look for a middle ground, it actually suggests that evolution might be the strongest evidence we have for a creator.
And this quote from Richard Dawkins, it just sums up the whole perceived conflict perfectly, doesn't it? When The Origin of Species came out in 1859, it wasn't just another science book. For a lot of people, it felt like the moment science finally came up with a story for creation that didn't need a creator. And boom, science and faith were set on a collision course.
And the impact of that split has been pretty stark. As our source material points out, some countries now have these historically high rates of atheism. The idea that all of life could just spring up from unguided material stuff, well, that became this powerful new worldview. For the first time, there was a mainstream explanation for why we're here that didn't require anything divine at all.
So, this all sets the stage for what our source actually calls a crisis of faith. For so many believers, this wasn't just some intellectual debate. No, it was this deep, personal challenge, a perceived war between scientific fact and the very foundation of their faith. You know, at the heart of this whole crisis was this really difficult forced choice. On one side, you had this growing mountain of scientific evidence for macroevolution, the idea that one species can evolve into a totally different one over millions of years. And on the other side, you had a lot of religious traditions just flat out rejecting it. Our source says this was a huge mistake. By framing it as this all-or-nothing decision, millions felt like they had to pick a side, and many ended up choosing science and leaving their faith behind.
But here's the twist. What if this entire conflict, this whole battle, is built on a completely false premise? What if the theory of evolution was never, ever meant to be atheistic in the first place? To figure that out, we've got to go back to the source, the guys who came up with the theory.
And that leads us to this really pivotal question. Today, the common assumption is that evolution was born out of an atheistic worldview, right? But is that actually true? Well, when you start digging into the historical record, a very, very different picture starts to emerge. Okay, so take Alfred Russel Wallace. This guy wasn't just some fan of evolution, he was its co-discoverer, right alongside Darwin. And just look at what he said. He saw the process not as random chaos, but as having unmistakable guidance and control. In fact, our source even suggests that Wallace isn't as much of a household name today, precisely because his spiritual views just didn't fit the purely materialistic story that took over later on.
And Darwin himself? Well, in his own words, he said he felt compelled to look to a first cause, having an intelligent mind, and that he deserved to be called a theist. Now, his faith might have gone up and down during his life, but he was not an atheist. The record is crystal clear. The theory of evolution was founded by men who believed in a higher intelligence.
So, if the founders were theists, how on earth did evolution get so tied up with atheism? Well, the answer is in what happened next. Something called neo-Darwinism. This is the modern version of the theory you probably learned in high school, the one that completely stripped out any idea of guidance and said life is shaped only by random mutation and natural selection. But here's the thing. Now, even that theory is facing some serious heat from inside the scientific community itself.
Yeah, the challenges to this purely random neo-Darwinist idea are popping up all over the place. You've got paleontologists like Stephen Jay Gould talking about punctuated equilibrium. Basically, the fossil record seems to show species appearing in sudden bursts, not just slow, tiny changes. Then there's the intelligent design movement, with ideas like irreducible complexity, arguing some biological machines are just way too complex to be built one random step at a time. And maybe the most amazing? Nobel Prize winner Barbara McClintock found that cells can actually intelligently change their own DNA when they're under stress. All these discoveries are fueling what's called the third way, a movement of mainstream scientists actively looking for non-random forces that might be guiding evolution. Okay, so if evolution isn't purely random, that begs a massive question. What is the guiding mechanism? How could a creator possibly influence how life develops without just smashing the laws of physics? Well, the proposed answer comes from the weirdest, most fundamental corner of science, the quantum realm. This right here is the absolute core idea of intelligent evolution. See, down at the quantum level, reality isn't set in stone. It's kind of like a cosmic choose-your-own-adventure game. This theory suggests that God doesn't need to break the laws of physics to act. Instead, God simply chooses the best possible outcome from the menu of options that quantum mechanics already allows. So it's not a miracle that violates nature. It's a constant, subtle guidance through the fabric of nature itself. This really leads to two completely different ways of seeing the universe. The old idea was the clockwork universe, a machine that God wound up at the very beginning and is now just slowly running down, falling apart because of entropy. But intelligent evolution pictures a calibrated universe, a flexible system that's constantly being fine-tuned and improved by an intelligent agent. This, the theory says, is how life can actually get more complex over time, fighting back against that natural pull towards decay.
Now, this framework for evolution is one thing, but how does it possibly handle the ultimate test case, the biblical story of Adam and Eve? This is where the theory gets really specific.
So here's the proposed model. It starts with that biblical idea of Adam being formed from the dust of the ground. The theory speculates that this dust could have literally contained DNA from earlier hominids like Neanderthals or Denisovans. From that raw genetic material, God then re-engineers a brand new creation, Adam, a completely unique being with incredible new abilities like complex language. So in this one model, you try to reconcile our shared genetic ancestry with the idea of a unique divine origin for humankind.
And what's just wild is that this idea of a sudden, dramatic leap gets support from a totally unexpected place, the world-famous secular linguist Noam Chomsky. He argues that complex language probably didn't evolve slowly over ages. He thinks it most likely appeared very sudden, from a massive genetic mutation in a single person. Now that scientific theory lines up surprisingly well with the religious idea of a unique first human receiving the gift of language.
So how do you explain the fact that our genes are so similar to other primates? The source gives this absolutely brilliant analogy from the game Minecraft. You can use the same basic blocks to build, say, a simple bridge. But a genius designer can use those exact same blocks to build a working computer inside the game. The blocks are identical, but what you can do with them is worlds apart. The theory suggests this is like our genes. We shared the basic blocks with other primates, but our unique regulatory networks, that design, creates something radically different, advanced human consciousness.
All right, so when we pull all these threads together, what does this new perspective really offer us? Well, it fundamentally reframes the entire debate between evolution and faith.
The core argument is really this. By rejecting macroevolution completely, believers kind of left the field open. They accidentally allowed the purely random, materialistic, neo-Darwinist version to become the only theory in town. Intelligent evolution just flips that entire script. It says believers shouldn't be afraid of macroevolution. They should embrace it as the very method, the very art form of a creator who is constantly, actively, and beautifully shaping the story of life.
And that leads us with one last big question to think about. What if evolution isn't the story of a world that doesn't need a creator? What if it's actually the story of the method used by a creator who never, ever stops creating?